I want to welcome in Carson Ingle from 1080 The Team down in Orlando. Carson's also a graduate of UCF and has been following realignment discussions closely over the past several years. Carson, wanted to welcome you into the show, and thanks for joining.
Hey, it's great to be with you, man.
So there's a lot to get to here with the announcement a couple days ago from Big 12 leadership that expansion is really going to be moving forward full throttle, so to speak. First off, what's the reaction been down in Orlando now that expansion is back on the table?
Yeah, I think it's absolute pandemonium. People's heads just popping off. I mean, pretty much what you would expect in any location where this is a possibility. People are sort of tense, but also excited and just basically clamoring for any little bit of information that they can get.
Now, you've probably been in touch with some leaders down at UCF, as well as other media members in Orlando. Has UCF been public at all in their pursuit this time around? And have you talked to first-year head coach Scott Frost about the current situation?
Yeah, I think UCF's been very public about the situation. I mean, there was a press conference scheduled the morning after the announcement on Tuesday from the Big 12 just to announce the new baseball coach, Greg Lovelady at UCF, but that press conference got an added visitor. Originally, President Dr. Hill wasn't supposed to be there, but he made an appearance on the podium, and most people largely speculated that it was because he wanted to be there to address any Big 12 questions, and of course, after the presser, the media that was there talked to him, and he was just very public in advocating for UCF's inclusion into the Big 12. We really haven't heard much from Scott Frost about the Big 12 at any point just because he is so new, and so he's kind of just getting his feet underneath him here as a coach. So we really haven't heard much from him, but as you know, this is sort of a matter that gets handled at the presidential level, and John Hitt's been very public in promoting UCF.
Now, what's your sense of UCF's chances? Any feedback that you've received from either school or media members as well?
I think people are a little bit still kind of wondering what the Big 12 is actually going to do from a UCF perspective. I think people feel optimistic. There's some hope there. The main thing that I've heard that is kind of a linchpin to people's optimism is that Navigate Research, one of the main firms that the Big 12 contracted out to basically give information, provide data to the Big 12 on expansion candidates, on a conference network, on even, the conference title game, all those things. They hired Navigate out of Chicago, and Navigate presented that to them in those Big 12 meetings a few months ago. Well, UCF has a tie with Navigate because they also contracted them out a few years ago to do some work for them, and the thought is that basically because Navigate was able to pile through all the data on UCF already, that they had a pretty good idea of what UCF adds to the table when presenting that information to the Big 12.
Now I'm talking with Carson Ingle of 1080 The Team down in Orlando. Now I've been doing some interviews related to Big 12 expansion over the last 2 days, and I know Commissioner Bowlesby had mentioned that they're considering 2 or 4 teams for expansion. It seems the consensus of everyone I talked to is 4, which probably bodes well for both UConn and UCF overall.
Right.
What are you thinking? What are you hearing in terms of amount of teams?
Yeah, it seems 4 for sure to me because it's just a dollars and cents issue. When you can add 4 teams and then have those 4 teams take less of a payout than the full share that you're getting from your TV partners, why wouldn't you go ahead and add 4, have 4 take that less share, and then you add more money to cut up against, amongst the other 10. So that's why 4 makes sense. I really believe that this whole thing was kicked in a high gear once the ACC network was announced. I don't think the Big 12 likes that after being kind of pushed to the side when they wanted a network, and they're like, okay, well, if you're not going to give us the network and the revenue we can generate off of that, we're going to go get an extra $6 to $8 million a piece for our current 10 members by making ESPN and Fox pay the pro rata dollar amount that's in the contract that they have to give any additional members of the conference and expansion in equal payouts. So they're going to have to raise the money, and that ultimately is beneficial for the 10 current schools in the Big 12, at least as for how long that they actually make these schools kind of take that smaller cut of the money.
Now, another school that is under consideration, Houston, it seems opinions towards an addition of Houston from the Texas schools, at least, has changed a little bit in recent days, and a lot of backlash is coming from schools outside of Texas within the Big 12 when talking Houston. I know you saw on social media earlier Texas Governor Greg Abbott pretty much handing an ultimatum to the Texas schools and really politicking to get Houston involved. What's your thoughts in terms of that move?
Yeah, we never know. Seeing it on Twitter, I don't know how serious that is, if he was just making a blanket statement, if there's actually been work behind the scenes with him, although Tillman Fertitta, the guy that everyone's seen, has been very vocal for months for Houston, huge booster, a big money guy in that state. He has a reality TV show, I think, on CNBC. He's the brother of the Fertitta brothers that are selling the UFC right now. He's a big money guy. He's given a ton of money to Governor Abbott's campaign. So you can rest assured that I'm sure he's maybe made a call to the governor's office and gotten him involved in this whole thing. I think that's a very dangerous proposition for anyone else that wants to get into the Big 12. And like you mentioned, maybe UCF and UConn kind of view themselves as 13 and 14 or in that mix. But if Governor Abbott and the political heavyweights in Texas start saying, look, you guys can't do this unless you're going to put Houston in, and if you put Houston in, we'll do X, Y, and Z for your institution, that's going to bode very well for the Cougars' candidacy, and I would not be surprised if that's ultimately what pushes them through. I mean, we've seen this in expansion before. Way back when the Southwest Conference was disbanded, that the governor of Texas then pushed for Baylor to get in the conference, and that's one of the main reasons that Baylor was in. So this is something that we've seen quite a number of times. I mean, I even remember the whole Virginia Tech thing in the ACC. The Virginia governor got involved in that whole thing. So we've seen politics sort of enter the fray in this area before, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to happen again.
Now, I'm not sure if you're coming up to football media days in Newport for the AAC in a couple weeks. Should be an interesting time in Newport this year. Most candidates are within the AAC and are either in talks or want to get out of that conference. Overall, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think schools from the AAC are going to be leaving? Is it going to be more BYU, Boise State? What's your overall sense of what direction the Big 12 is going to go?
You know, I don't know how many AAC schools are going to be in this thing, but it's certainly no doubt that there's going to be some AAC schools in the mix. And look, I think if you're the American, I mean, you know, you can act all like, well, all upset or whatever about this, but I don't really think you can be that mad. I mean, it's just simply these schools looking out for the interests of themselves, and I can't blame them for that. I'm not sure that Mike Oresco, I don't think he'll do that. He's a pretty classy guy, so I think he'll maintain a solid front. But obviously these conferences are in trouble. I mean, the recent conference television deal that Conference USA was able to work out was basically, nothing, a no money deal for them. So you got to worry if you're the American. You've had all this success in your short history, but if you continue to be kicked off and lose teams, then those teams that are left behind in that conference are really going to, I think, struggle to find a decent television contract.
And then final question for Carson Ingle of 1080 The Team in Orlando. Switching gears to UConn, I am up in Connecticut, so I do want to touch on them. Being down in Florida, what's your view and your sense of what UConn brings to another conference? And do you see them as a viable candidate like many up here do?
I do see them as a viable candidate. It's just, to me, I'm not sure how viable for the Big 12. It's just such a strange fit, the whole Northeastern factor. I don't see schools, especially, and again, like I mentioned, this is all handled at the presidential level, but they hear input from people. And I can't imagine coaches wanting to have the prospect of playing a game in late November in the Northeast. I think that reared its head in that poll that they did of polling coaches in the Big 12 the other day. So I think that's a factor, however small it is. I know that it's not the easiest campus and facility to get to when you're talking about these expansion candidates. And then for me, I think my main question, and even I'd like to kind of hear your feedback on this before we're over, is just how much potential there is for growth of a football fan base. I'm not sure that UConn has that. I think they kind of are what they are in football in terms of a fan interest standpoint, because as we know, the Northeast just isn't a big college football market. So that'd be my question there. Now, obviously, the positive, excellent basketball program. They've got a good university. It's a state flagship university, which is important to these presidents that are making the decisions. So there's positive. Okay, brand name. What are the best brand names? Okay, brand name. What are the best brand names of expansion candidates? I think BYU is your number one top brand name, and UConn nationally is probably the second most well-known candidate of these expansion schools. So there are positives, but there's certainly drawbacks too, and they're just drawbacks that I don't know fit the profile of what the Big 12 will ultimately look for.
Yeah, in terms of your question regarding UConn and football fan support, I would say there definitely is a market for football here in Connecticut. UConn's really the pro sports team in the state. And if you look back when UConn joined the Big East, they were consistently selling out their stadium. There were talks about potential expansion of the stadium, which can be done. The way the stadium was built, it can add another 15 to 20,000 seats during an off season. And they were consistently selling out. Like I said, they've been at 93% capacity since the stadium opened in 2003, even taking into account the down years over the last 3 or 4 years. And if you look at the types of opponents that they've played, they went from playing BCS caliber teams in the Big East to, from the fans' point of view, is really a watered down schedule. So you're going to see a little diminish in interest in terms of fan support at that point. In football as an overall sport in the Northeast, I mean, you're looking at a huge following in football. You have the Patriots, and on a professional scale, you have the Patriots, Jets, and Giants all right in a single area. And I think what happened in terms of fan support and actual purchases of tickets, the Jets, Giants, and Patriots are all drivable from the state of Connecticut. So when fans are looking at options, are they going to go see maybe a watered-down product than they were used to at UConn, or are they going to maybe drive a little further away on Sundays and take in an NFL game, which is top-level talent and competition? So in that regard, I think Connecticut has proven that when we play top-tier teams, the fans are going to be there. Certainly in basketball, you see that all the time. And if they're playing on the top-level competition, I have no doubt that UConn fans will come out. For example, 2 years ago, Michigan came in. We had to add seats at the stadium to support the demand. So if you have Texas and Oklahoma, TCU, Baylor, even though they may be going down and with all the issues they're going through now, I have no doubt that the fan support would be there.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how it works out if it happens, because I mean, even some of these schools in the Big 12, I don't know how much your region will really look at them as marquee opponents. Certainly Texas and Oklahoma go without saying, but then you look at the rest of the Big 12, and I'm just not sure if people will really identify with those schools. I mean, just a short example, even here at UCF, there's normally one marquee home game on the schedule each year, and there was one year Missouri came in, and that was the marquee home game. Well, even though Missouri is a Power 5 opponent, people didn't really see that as a marquee game here. It just wasn't a school that the fan base in this area and in this region identified as a big-time opponent. So I'll just be interested to kind of see, what's really the draw or the catch with, UConn, Kansas State, UConn, Iowa State, and even some of the bigger programs like Baylor and TCU. But I mean, that's just what makes this thing fascinating, and we'll see how it all plays out. Yeah,
certainly basketball-wise, the Kansas, Iowa States, Texas is that clearly draws interest on a national scale, specifically regionally. I think one of the downsides of conference expansion, which we've seen, is the elimination of those local rivalries. And I think that goes into play with especially football attendance recently in Connecticut. Coming back this year on the schedule is Syracuse, is Boston College, is Virginia. Not necessarily top-level teams around the nation, but regionally, the UConn-Boston College rivalry. I mean, Bob Diaco can talk all he wants about the civil conflict with UCF and you guys, but really, Boston College is it, and UConn fans have been itching to get them back on the schedule for the last, I think it's been 13 years since they played, and they went to the ACC, and they blocked UConn from entrance into that conference. So that's been circled on the calendars even before the game got scheduled for this season, and it's back on, and that's really going to be a heated rivalry and hopefully something that continues. And I hope long-term that maybe if television networks do go by the wayside in the future, maybe 5, 10, 15 years down the line, that maybe we do go see a more regional approach to how conferences are set up, because it really draws interest and drives passion, which is really what college athletics is all about. It's about rivalries, it's about passion, it's about really representing your school. So at least that's what I hope down in the future.
It's a shame, and I could talk about how odd a cultural and geographic fit UConn is in the Big 12, but these kind of clunky marriages are seen now throughout the college football landscape. So I don't think that certainly eliminates UConn by any stretch from the discussion here. Yeah. And that is ultimately the goal, I think. You get in to a Power 5 conference, and then you see what happens. It's much better to be in now and to be able to grow your brand for however many of years, and then see what happens. And maybe we do have a reshuffling of the deck down the line, and things become a little more geographically ordered.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They have to, especially at UConn, they need to take care of themselves in the time being, especially financially, because they operate like they're still in a P5 conference. They have outstanding facilities. Their football facility, believe it or not, is probably on par with any SEC school out there. They built it in the mid-2000s. They thought they were joining a power conference, and then the power conference left them. And they sit now with this great facility, but they're playing some lesser opponents, perception-wise. I know the AAC has performed well over the last 2 years, but that's just the way it is. The money's not there from the television contracts, and that's really going to be an issue moving forward if UConn can't find a way into a Power 5. They're going to have to definitely change the way that they operate the athletic department.
Right. I mean, that's what all these schools are doing, and that's why it's so critical, this time period, this window in time. I mean, you look at UCF, and they've been spending a lot of money on coaches with Johnny Dawkins and Scott Frost. Obviously, tons of new facilities there. They're strapped in terms of the student fee that they charge students that goes into the athletic budget. You've got Cincinnati that upgraded their stadium. You've got Houston pouring in something like a $500 million into facilities. Memphis has pledged to do the same. So all of these schools are doing this because they are hoping to put their best foot forward for kind of the final boat off of the island, and there is not enough, seats at the table for all of these schools. So someone's going to be left behind, and I imagine at that point their priorities and the way in which they conduct the business of their athletic department probably drastically change.
Yeah, and I guess one last thing from a Connecticut point of view that the fans and media are really interested to see is how new athletic director David Benedict handles this, because this is really his first real issue he's had to deal with. He came from Auburn a few months ago. He extended Bob Diaco right upon his arrival. He brought in Vic Siegels, who was the former athletic director at Long Beach State. And he also brought in an assistant athletic director from the University of Minnesota. So he's really stacking up his athletic department, and he's renewing coaches. But that can only go so far until you get that conference invite. So he's going to be judged, I think, pretty harshly based on the result here if it doesn't go in UConn's favor by the media and fans. So it's an opportunity, but it's also a chance that he's going to be judged on this, and it's a tough position to be in, especially new to UConn.
And again, I don't really know how fair that is, because these things are all handled by the president. Now, certainly Ward Manuel was such an influential athletic director that maybe he would have been able to provide a boost, been more of a factor in the process. But really, these things are handled at a presidential level. I mean, we're seeing it even at UCF. because UCF has a new AD in Danny White, a guy who's very influential in college athletics. His dad's the AD at Duke. He's got that pedigree, but he's been definitely taking a back seat in this whole thing. I mean, even at that press conference I mentioned that Dr. Hitt spoke at, Danny White also addressed the question in the actual press conference, and he just sort of gave the typical PC by the book answer. So he's really not a factor in this, and I don't think many athletic directors across the country do factor in.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Definitely, I don't know how much time you have here, but I'm going to need to wind down momentarily. But before we do go, I do want to give you the opportunity, give the listeners a chance to see where they can see some of your work, hear you on the airwaves.
Definitely, yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter at CAINGLE, and that's really the best place to lock into everything that I do because I'm all over the place. But I do host a Saturday morning show here in Orlando on 1080 The Team called the Sports Talk Florida Insider Show. We went through about a month period where we had destination expansion talk pretty much every week, and I have a feeling starting this Saturday that we're going to be ramping that up again for the foreseeable future. So we'll definitely be talking a lot of expansion. I also fill in a lot during the week, and so we also get into stuff there, and then you can find all the links to my writing and all that stuff again on my Twitter account at CAINGLE.
All right, thanks, Carson. I'm sure we'll be touching base over the next couple weeks to a month, and hopefully we see a resolution to all this shortly.
Sounds good, man. Thanks for having me.